Our scripture lesson for this morning comes from Matthew's Gospel. We're going to be reading chapter 22, verses 1 through 14. I invite you to stand in honor of the reading of the Gospel. Once more, Jesus spoke to them in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding banquet for his son. He sent his slaves to call those who had been invited to the wedding banquet, but they would not come. Again, he sent other slaves, saying, 'Tell those who have been invited, look, I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and my fat calves have been slaughtered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet.' But they made light of it and went away, one to his farm, another to his business, while the rest seized his slaves, mistreated them, and killed them. The king was enraged. He sent his troops, destroyed those murderers, and burned their city. Then he said to his slaves, 'The wedding is ready, but those invited were not worthy. Go therefore into the main streets and invite everyone you find to the wedding banquet.' Those slaves went out into the streets and gathered all whom they found, both good and bad, so the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to see the guest, he noticed a man there who was not wearing a wedding robe. And he said to him, 'Friend, how did you get in here without a wedding robe?' And he was speechless. Then the king said to the attendants, 'Bind him hand and foot and throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are called, but few are chosen.'" Friends, this is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Please be seated.
Before I begin, there's a couple of things that I need to do. One is to say thank you, choir, and men of praise are making their way toward the balcony because they're going to close the service for us from up there. It's going to be great fun, and it's a beautiful song, so thank you. But also to Dave and to Joan that we often forget about and couldn't do it without them, and to Bill. The music in this church is outstanding, and so I wanted to say a word of thank you to them. And Patrick, I believe that Jackie has substantially let everybody she can know that today is your birthday. But I want to say thank you for your good work with the special needs class and with the special needs here. I have every confidence that in the near future, Jackie's going to push me out of the way and preach one Sunday. Yesterday, I did a wedding. Now, I do a goodly number of weddings. Next week, I will go back to Chambly to do a wedding that's been on the books over a year. I promised to do this wedding before I ever knew I was leaving Chambly, and it's a special one. I'll tell you the story sometimes. And I'm looking forward to it because I'll see old friends, and so I'll go back on Friday evening for rehearsal, then on Saturday for the wedding. I do want you to know that they all tell me, "Oh, we miss you, we miss you, we miss you. Can't wait to see you next week. You are bringing Atticus, aren't you?" So he's a rock star wherever he goes. Yesterday's wedding was in Clarksville. Do you know it? It's up in the mountains, and so when I finally found the road, it was dirt, and I went down that dirt road, and then I found the number for the cabin, and the driveway was forever long. It just went on eternally, and it had no shoulders and went straight down the mountain, and leaves had covered up the driveway. So I prayed a little and went on about the business of getting to the bride and the groom. Now, the worst weddings I've ever done have been my grandchildren's. I send them to preacher friends for their counseling because I've been counseling them since they were born, and it hadn't done any good. There's no point in me continuing in that vein. I have 3 granddaughters that have married, another one that is coming up, and I probably won't get to do that one, her father-in-law to be is a Baptist preacher. So quite sure that I'll sit in the congregation for the next one. When they call me and say, I'm going to marry him, and this is the day, and will you officiate? I say, yes, and you don't even have to pay me. Don't let him get away. Time for you to get married, get out the house. Happy to do it, and call me when you get to the store, and I'll give them the card numbers, and I'm good for the dress. Don't ask me for anything else. I'm buying the dress, and I'm done. I don't care about venues. I don't care about vendors. I don't care about DJs. I don't care about caterers. I don't care about anything. I'm done. I'll be there to officiate. You show up for the sessions with a preacher that is not me. I bought the dress. I'm done. Do you know how much a wedding dress costs? It's worth every dime to be done. Every dime to be done. For that matter, do you know what a wedding costs? And most of the girls nowadays don't want to get married in a beautiful place like this. Some do, but most of them want to be married in an old barn that costs $4,000, or an engine room that used to be part of a mill, or some such thing. I never dreamed my boys would be paying that kind of money for a place that had paint peeling off the wall so their daughters could get married there. But I bought the dress, I'm done. I don't have to argue about any of that. The latest granddaughter that got married shoeless. All the girls went barefooted. I paid all that money for that dress, and she came down the aisle just as barefooted as the day she was born. They all had pedicures alike. Now, my other rule is that about 25 to 30 minutes after the wedding, I'm gone. I don't need to know as a grandmother what's going on at their reception. I don't want to know what's going on at their reception. As a preacher, even more so. The sweetest wedding, one of the sweetest weddings I think I have ever done, was a Harley Davidson wedding. The bride came to me about 3 weeks before the wedding and said, "Preacher, we're all wearing leather, and we'll buy it if you'll wear it." And I said, "The only leather you'll see on me is my shoes and my Bible. Save your money." They had 100 hogs. Now, if you don't know what hogs are, they're Harley-Davidson motorcycles. And they had 50 on each side lined up. We were out in this big field. There was a log cabin there, and they were cooking barbecue, and they had a bluegrass band. It was fun. I stood on the porch of the cabin, and when she came through those Harleys, 50 lined up on each side like an aisle of a church, he cried and cried and cried and cried, and that old burly beard was just soaked with his tears. And she pressed right through those Harleys. It was a fun wedding. I had already spotted the bad boys, the really bad boys in that group, and was prepared to leave 25 to 30 minutes after the wedding. But some big old boy ran up to me as soon as I said, "It's my privilege to present to you, Mr. and Ms., and handed me a plate of barbecue that was covered in Reynolds wrap and said, "We fixed you a plate to go." I got the message, and off I went. When I read this text, I decided I wouldn't preach it. I marked it in my worship planner, "Don't preach this text, go to Philippians." That was the alternate. That's where I was going. I sat down with the staff and said, I'm preaching from Philippians. We'll be studying Philippians, and the staff said, wait a minute. Now I've got to change all the music. Well, I got to change the children. Well, I got to change the youth because the youth are in an elevate, and we're using. I said, okay, hold up. I'll preach the gospel text. Dadgummit, I will preach the gospel text. I'm so glad they pushed me into a corner, and so glad that I studied this text. It's a hard one. Let me explain a little bit about what this text is saying, and this is only after several hours of study, reading different commentaries, reading different translations, praying about it. Poor Atticus, I would walk and pray, and he would stop to smell something, and 5 minutes later he'd still be smelling, and I'd still be praying. This is the third and last parable spoken in the temple in Jerusalem to the Jewish leaders. Now, Luke, didn't you love Luke singing? Wasn't he a pistol up here with his hands in his pockets and clapping? He's just like his daddy. St. Luke would have us to believe that this happened in a house because he's all-inclusive and he wants the Gentiles to be there, he wants everybody there, and so he would have us at a house, but not Matthew. Old Matthew is going to push us into the Jewish traditions, going to make Jesus a part of the Jewish heritage, going to make sure we understand that Jesus was a Jew, going to take us to the temple every chance he gets, and that's where this takes place in Matthew's gospel. This is the last of three. All three of these parables are judgment parables. I don't like judgment. It makes me uncomfortable. Hope it makes you that way. I like grace and plenty of it. I love to preach grace. I love to preach mercy and compassion and love and grace and forgiveness. I like all those things because I need all those things. Judgment is the last thing I need. But here we are. The invitation is issued to those that you would not expect to be coming to a king's wedding banquet. Not the doctors and the lawyers, not the Indian chiefs, not the professional people, not the elitist, not the mayor, not the city councilman. Those people were invited. But they said, I got to go see about this piece of land. Well, I need to meet with this businessman. I've got an important engagement. Well, I can't go because there are things on the farm that need to be done. And the king said, all right, go on and do them. I'll invite the common folk, the good and the bad and probably the ugly. And that includes us. Come on, he said, to the wedding banquet. Now I'm beginning to like the text. I'm really glad I decided to preach it. I looked into my old notes. I just knew I had studied this at some point and wouldn't have to work so hard. However, I've never preached this text before because it is that hard. So I studied it, and now I'm getting very comfortable because we're all invited to the banquet, and that's the way I like it. I'd a whole lot rather preach from Luke than I had Matthew because I like that inclusion. I'm not one of the fittest. I'm not one of the elitists. And Luke makes me feel so welcome. Matthew says you're not a Jew. So I'm getting more adapt to this text, getting more comfortable, beginning to really enjoy the study, and it just gets hard again that fast. He just turns on a dime, and he says, who is that guy sitting up there that's not in a wedding robe? What's he doing here, not dressed properly? And not only did the king throw him out, but he threw him into the outer darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of the teeth. And the only explanation we have is that many are called, but few are chosen, whatever that means. Now, when I was an associate, I realized that I didn't get to preach very often, and because I loved it so much, I would try to get every point that's in that text brought into the worship service, brought into the sermon. I had to make a point. Look at them. There's dozens of them here. And I just knew that I had to preach them all that Sunday, because who knew when I'd get to preach again? Finally got to be a lead pastor. Now I get to preach every Sunday, and they come right regular, so I'm happy to just concentrate on one point in this text. I'm not going to talk about many are called and few are chosen today. That's for another Sunday. What I am going to talk about today is this man that is sitting there improperly dressed. How dare he? Now, it is not easy to be Christian. And if you think it is, you're probably not doing it very well. It is hard to be Christian. And you see, this was not about clothes. Now, I see many of you in suits and ties, some of you with a loose collar but jackets on, others in polo shirts or golf shirts. Some of you are having your toes pinched by shoes. Some of the ladies are wearing their Sunday finest. I remember when I was a little girl, I had a Sunday dress. People don't do that as much anymore. It's not about what you're wearing. This text is not about what you're wearing. I know of a Methodist church not too far from here where all the ushers have to buy their suits at one particular store. They're all tailor-made. They're all exactly alike. The ties are bought to go with them. The shirts are bought to go with them. And when women started being ushers, they made the same suit for the women, except it had skirt instead of pants. I couldn't have been an usher there unless the skirt had pockets in it. Not about clothes, not about how you're dressed. The wedding robe that the king speaks of is really about what that robe represents. You with me? And so this fella shows up not wearing a wedding robe, which was offensive because the wedding robe was representative of love and respect for the king and his banquet and for the groom. Are you beginning to follow? This fella shows up not willing to dress with love, with mercy, with grace, not willing to dress with compassion and kindness and sharing, not willing to dress with forgiveness, not willing to dress to be fit for the kingdom. Are you with me? Had nothing to do with a piece of cloth. Nothing. This man was ousted because he was not dressed to be in service. He did not want to commit to the cause. He was there because he wanted to be at the banquet. Could not or would not be responsible enough to put God first before anything else. Now, some of us almost get there, but we usually don't quite make it. We want to work when it's convenient. We'll work for you, Jesus. We'll work for you. But we can't do it on Saturday because we go into the mountains. We can't do it on Thursday because we got a ball game. We can't do it on Wednesday night because that's the night the whole family gets together to eat supper. We can't do it on Sunday because that's the only day we have to sleep late. You with me? We want to show up when it's convenient. We even say we'll serve on committees, but we get to pick the committee. You with me? Some committees in the church are perceived to be power committees. That's the one I'll serve on. But don't ask me to take out the trash on Wednesday night, And don't ask me to serve in the kitchen on Wednesday night. Don't ask me to lead the little children. They get all sticky and yucky. And when we have a covered dish supper, people will bring this little bowl of English peas that came out of a little can. Now, I like English peas, but they got to be out of that silver can. They got to be connoisseur English peas. And if I bring English peas, I'll even put a little pat of butter in them before I heat them up in the microwave. That's my offering, you see. Not many people bring a pot of chickens and dumplings. Not many people bring a pot roast. Not many people are going to stand and cook Kentucky Fried. We'll go by and buy Kentucky Fried. You see? We'll give, even when we ask about an offering, we'll give, but we have to give according to what we think we can. We want to give what is left over instead of first fruits. That's how we work. After I buy the new dress, after I buy the new car, after I buy the summer home, after we buy the boat to go with it, after we buy, then we will give. That's why we fold our green up in little bitty wads that make it very hard to count on Monday morning, because we don't want our neighbor to see the denomination of the bill. We just want them to see us putting green in the plate. That's why we carefully fold our paper checks and put them in so nobody can see them. Well, let me stop for just a minute and say, don't get your stewardship cards out just yet. You need to be praying over those. And let me say to you, those of you who are giving appropriately to God and feel good about what you're giving to the church and to God, God bless you. Don't have to listen anymore. You're done for the day. Amen. Go home, enjoy your lunch, and watch the football game. But you need to look at this step-up chart. And if you find yourself in one of these categories where you know you should not be, but should be higher, you need to hear every word of this sermon. And I have given permission to the other two services, and I give permission to you to call Hope, call Jeff. They'll be expecting your call. What does the preacher give per month to the church? And they should tell you. They have my permission to do that. And then you should look at what you pay me and see if it's not 1/10 of that plus what I give to Gibson Hall. I don't do that to impress you. I don't care that much what you think of me. I do that because that's what I need to do as a spiritual discipline. That's what God called me to do. I can't stand and preach to you about it if I don't do it myself. I do that because I want to. Call them and ask them. I want you to know. God does not need your money, but you need to give it. And because I love you, and because I want what is best for you, and because I care about your peace of mind, I will not apologize for preaching this sermon. Nobody but Jeff and Hope know what you tithe, what you pledge, what you give. Nobody. And you couldn't put a gun to their head and make them tell you. But look at how we spend your money. I want you to see that we try to be good stewards, and we cannot be in mission. We cannot have the programs. We cannot do the things that we need to do in this community unless you give selflessly. We cannot do it. And the things that we do because of your generosity. So for those of you who are that generous with your time, your talents, your gifts, your service, and your witness, God bless you. You don't have to listen to this. Do you realize that it takes $10,000 a week to keep the electricity on in this building? $10,000. And we can't offer any programs without the electricity on. Take your step-up chart home and look at it and see if you're doing what puts you in a right spot between you and Christ. And if part of your trappings, if part of your dress is not in line with what keeps you in good relation with Christ, it's on you, not on Christ. And you can be mad at me if you want to. I told the last worship service, be mad if you want to. You can do that. I've been mad at by bigger and better than you. And probably will be again. Because this is a hard text and this is a hard subject. Hard to speak it, hard to hear it. But I'm going to do what God has called me to do. You can't dress in selfless, radical love of Christ and love of all God's children without it being costly. You cannot do it. It's expensive to dress in the appropriate garb of a Christian. It will cost you. For me, I can witness to you that it cost me everything. And I would do it again in a heartbeat. And I can't outgive God because the more I give, the more blessing I receive. Sometimes not monetarily, but I got enough to buy those wedding dresses and be done. Even if it costs you everything, you will never find peace, you will never be happy, you will not be content, you will not know how to love and be loved until you put aside what you have being the most important thing in your life and let to whom you belong be the most important thing in your life. Amen. The closing hymn today is found on page 381. The altar is open for your prayers, and if you would like, I would hope that you would come to the altar, but certainly you're invited to make an altar of your pew. If you are not going to be here next Sunday, which is Consecration Sunday, please, you can bring your envelopes down today, and we'll see that they get to Jeff and Hope, or you can bring them by the office this week or mail them in. Any of those things will work. But what I'm encouraging you to do is pray over this. Truly seek God's wisdom about what you can do in your life for Christ's sake. Amen.